Okay, so we finally got to see the rings of the Mandarin in the new Shang-Chi trailer. And it's kind of cool, right? We're going to break this whole thing down here, which is going to be kind of tough to do because honestly, the trailer didn't really give us anything that we hadn't seen in the first one, but there were a few big things that we saw. Number one, we finally know where Emil Blonsky's been, right? Abomination was like in the great big huge fighting cage, not really sure how he escaped. Last I heard, or last I saw, if I remember correctly, and it's been a long time since I saw The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, I guess he was just let loose. Anyway, regardless of the situation, that's where he is now, which is kind of cool to see them actually do something with Emil Blonsky. By God, I never thought he was gonna make his return. The second thing that we got to see is what looked like Fin Fang Foom. Now, supposedly, the idea of Fin Fang Foom in Shang-Chi had been completely debunked like 3 weeks ago. So only one of two things is going on. Either it was being debunked because they were lying to us and they just wanted to build up the hype and excitement so that when it was revealed that it was Fin Fang Foom, it'd be a great big huge deal, or that's Axon Carr. I'm more inclined to believe that it's Axon Carr just given the origin of the 10 rings and the Mandarin and all that kind of stuff, but it's a giant dragon. Fin Fang Foom is a giant dragon. Okay, so let's turn to the Comics Explained for a second. Because there's not a whole lot to break down here, I mean, it's kind of a cool trailer. Let's give you guys a little bit of history about the 10 rings, the Mandarin, what the rings are, how all that stuff works. Okay, so there was a comic book run of Iron Man that was written by a guy named Matt Fraction, a legendary Iron Man comic book run, and I have it all over Comics Explained, so make sure you guys check out the description at the end of this video. But the whole thing behind this is it gave us a really more updated and a really accurate origin for the Mandarin. So the way this worked is that the Mandarin was actually a guy who was born to a prostitute in an opium den. Yeah. He didn't really come into the world in the best situation, but ultimately he ended up basically escaping after his mom died, and then he got caught up in the communist revolution in China, which ultimately he ended up fleeing China because he was considered a fugitive. Now in Invincible Iron Man issue 522, which was written by Matt Fraction, we found out that the Mandarin had actually traveled to a place called the Valley of Spirits, where he came across a cave that was being occupied by Axon Carr. Now Axon Carr is what you call a McLuhan. That's also the same thing that Fin Fang Foom is. These are basically extraterrestrial aliens. Fin Fang Foom looks like a giant dragon. He really is in a lot of ways a giant dragon. Technically he's a shapeshifter, but the form he takes is that of a giant dragon. But Axon Carr was basically a McLuhan who left his world and even his own galaxy to explore the universe and to see if there was any other intelligent life there. He arrived on Earth and found intelligent life. The problem is the intelligence of the life on Earth led them to kill him, or at least mortally wound him. And so when the Mandarin found Axon Carr in the cave, he killed him and then took the 10 rings. Now the 10 rings are basically these items that were actually powering the ship in the original story, but they actually have power of their own. Technically they encase the spirits of like long dead cosmic warriors, and so a person who possesses the rings can use the power of the warriors. The idea behind it though is it's very much like the Ring of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, in the sense that when a person is in possession of the 10 rings, they have this constant drive and desire to actually help those cosmic warriors return to their normal bodies. And that started to play out to a degree during Matt Fraction's run when the Mandarin forced Tony Stark to build these great big huge mech suits that the cosmic warrior spirits could occupy. It didn't quite work out, and I believe that was in the story called The Rings, but it didn't quite work out, and so of course, you know, the day was more or less saved from the Earth being conquered by cosmic beings with seemingly unlimited power. But to break these rings down, here's how they work, and here's how these rings function. So the first ring you have here is one called the Remaker, and this basically allows the Mandarin to alter the molecular structure or the atomic structure of matter, but there are limitations. It does not allow the Mandarin, for example, to turn a teacup into like a pot of gold or something like that. He can't really transmute matter, so he can't turn something into something else. He can just kind of manipulate the atomic structure of it. And this is kind of a way for Marvel to explain, yeah, he can use the ring to alter the atomic structure of matter, but he's never going to be on the same level as the Molecule Man Owen Reese. He can't alter reality on a universal scale, just on a super small scale. The second ring is called Influence, and this is basically just a ring that allows the Mandarin to emit like concussive blasts, right? To literally just blast people with huge amounts of energy. Now, there doesn't really seem to be a definitive upper limit to the amount of energy he can use, and the energy seems to be relative to whatever villain he's facing off against at the time. More often than not, Marvel's kept it pretty small, mostly because of the fact that the Mandarin is largely an Iron Man villain, and so you don't really need the ability to shatter a world when you're fighting Iron Man. The third ring is called Spin, and this is one that basically allows the person who's using it to kind of emit this vortex to create what is basically a mini tornado. And they can use this for a couple different ways. One, they can encase other people in it and they can trap them there. They can throw them off their guard. In the case of Iron Iron Man, he can use it on him and just make him spin. You can use it to make yourself fly, but it's basically the ability to control the air around you and use that for a variety of different purposes. Usually it's used with flight. The next one is called Nightbringer, and this is actually a ring that's a little bit wonky here. So the whole idea behind Nightbringer is it basically allows the Mandarin to encase a person in what is more or less living darkness. In Marvel Comics, we call this Dark Force energy. The Dark Force dimension is kind of a weird thing, right? It's not like the dark dimension of Dormammu, but it's a wholly separate dimension whereby it's kind of like a ethereal sort of substance that actually absorbs light. And so because of that, if you encase a person in this, no light can get in and no light can get out. And they're literally just wrapped in this kind of substance. There's no way for them to escape. And so from that point going forward, for however long the Mandarin keeps them encased there, unless a person's able to escape from it, they'll be locked in eternal darkness. They'll never know where they are. Like literally they could start walking in a forward direction and get hit by a car. It's a weird thing. It's cool. You don't really see it all that often. Now the funny thing is that this ring also has a few other caveats to it. Light force generations, the ability to basically blind a person with a bright light, the ability to create magnetic fields, the ability to enhance the gravity around individuals. So the Nightbringer ring is intriguing in that it's different from a lot of the other rings because it has a couple extra caveats that the other rings simply just don't have. Now Incandescence is a pretty straightforward ring. This one just allows him to emit and control fire. Not a whole lot to it besides that. Now the Liar is my personal favorite ring, and this is the one that allows the Mandarin to manipulate the thoughts of others. But when he uses this, he in effect has a low-grade level of what we would call telepathy throughout Marvel Comics. So using the Liar ring does not put him on the same scale as like Jean Grey or Professor X of the X-Men. There'd be no way he could overcome them given that ring, but he is able to use it to create like mental illusions or to trick people into believing that an original idea is actually their own instead of his. It really is just telepathy in its most pure form. Now, whenever the Mandarin uses the Liar ring, one of the things he most commonly does with it is create mental paralysis, and this does a couple different things depending on the context and who's writing the story. Either it's straight up paralysis where the person's mind is completely shut down and they go into what's effectively a comatose state, or it keeps the brain from being able to send messages to the rest of the body, so they are effectively locked inside their own head. Again, it really depends on who's writing the story there. Brian Michael Bendis has done it one way, Matt Fraction's done it another, but at the end of the day, it all still pretty much achieves the same result, which is incapacitating that person using mental abilities. Now the last two rings, Lightning and Zero, are a lot like Incandescence. They're pretty basic. Lightning, as you can guess, allows the Mandarin to emit and to control lightning. Zero allows him to emit and to control cold. Now, one of the big differences here with Zero and somebody like Iceman Bobby Drake is the Mandarin's abilities are not on that same level, right? Iceman Bobby Drake is an Omega level mutant. He has the ability, if he chose to actually freeze the core of the Earth and kill life on it. The Mandarin doesn't quite have that ability. Again, his powers are on a much smaller scale. So encasing people in ice, making them incredibly cold, freezing the environment around him, that kind of a thing. But again, it's all done in a localized space as opposed to potentially being done in a global space. But those are the rings of the Mandarin. That's basically how they all work. One of the things that's interesting about the movie is instead of them being actual rings that he wears on his fingers, instead they're bracelets. So I don't know why they don't call it Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Bracelets. Probably because it just doesn't have the same ring to it, right? No pun intended. But it just doesn't quite have the same kind of, pizzazz, right? It just doesn't roll off the tongue as well, which is fine. And also, if we're looking at the idea of that dragon, which is hopefully Fin Fang Foom, having been the person that originally wielded the rings, well, it would make sense they would have to be bracelets because that guy's fingers are probably huge. So they would have to fit on those fingers, which means those rings would have to be enormous. But having said that, one of the big things that goes on here, and this is something to kind of keep in mind when it comes to the movie, is we don't exactly know how those rings are coming to the Mandarin. We don't know if the rings somehow have the caveat of giving him an extended lifespan, if those rings have been passed down over the course of generations. In the trailer, he says, over the course of my life. He doesn't say over the course of our entire family history. It's just over the course of my life. So we don't know how far back those go. And if they focus largely on the comics, then it could be one of these things where the Mandarin just stumbled across the rings in his youth and has been using them ever since. It may be one of these things where it was largely given to him under the pretenses he would use it for good and then in turn decide to use it for evil. We've seen stuff like that play out in Marvel Comics all the time. That's how Dr. Doom stole all the vibranium in Wakanda, was by tricking the Panther god Bast. So this is pretty common stuff to take place in Marvel Comics. We see it happen all the time. But again, the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of has a its own format and its own function. It changes things around a little bit. But, you know, the thing about the trailer, it looks like they're obviously keeping a lot of things hidden, right? A lot of the major plot of the movie, a lot of the little Easter eggs that we're gonna see, maybe other appearances that are gonna show up, they're keeping a lot of that stuff contained. This had a lot of recycled footage from the first trailer, so I'm not too upset about it. Honestly, I kind of expected that. It's only the second trailer. I imagine once we get to the final trailer, the actual end-all be-all trailer just before the film's release, we'll start getting some new footage, and if we don't, no big deal. At least I don't have to worry about going into the movie and having it spoiled for me. So, with that being said, guys, let me know what you think about the trailer down in the comment section, and we will catch you all later. Peace.